Kiara Reed says, question for AP and Mr. Wood. I am atheist, but I feel like I love Jesus. Since I think about Jesus, my life has been much better and I'm happier, but I'm scared because so much people argue it's fake. How do I find the truth? First, I will let David speak.
Um, yeah, that's actually very common. It was more recent where you had atheists who were like angry about Jesus. Back in the day, it was okay. Yeah, Jesus is a really good guy. Don't believe in the miracles. Don't believe in any of that stuff. Don't believe in that. But really good guy. Glad he had such a important impact on humanity. Then you had, the angry atheist. And fortunately, the angry atheists have been losing ground recently. Allows people to have a bit more common sense. The common sense reaction as an atheist would be, okay, so I don't believe in, God and so on, but I have to acknowledge Jesus is a really good guy and had a lot of teachings that really helped the world. Um, and therefore, you would have a more favorable view. But you might want to think more about why you like Jesus, and just think, if he wasn't who he claimed to be, he'd kind of be he'd kind of be mental. He'd kind of be mental or evil. And so this is the famous trilemma, which doesn't work perfectly well because there are other alternatives. But when you actually go to the alternatives, they don't work. So anyway, the idea here is we have an idea of the impact Jesus made on the people around him and the kinds of things he was saying. Okay. And we know about Jesus' impact on the world. So this got put as a trilemma. If Jesus is making these kinds of claims about himself and you think, oh, I don't believe he's Lord, I think he's just a good guy. Okay, well, if he's not Lord and he was saying the kinds of things that he was saying about himself, he would not be a good guy. He would be some sort of lunatic. In other words, if he thinks he is all these things and he's this divine son of God and he's not, then he's kind of a lunatic. Or he would be someone who's making things up about himself. In other words, he's deliberately deceiving people about his own identity. So none of those would be a good person. And none of those kinds of guys, whether he's a lunatic or a liar, should have had the kind of positive moral impact he's had on humanity. So once that was presented as a kind of trilemma, people responded, oh, well, it doesn't have to be one of those. It could have just been legendary development that appeared many, many years later. Problem with that is we know this stuff is very early. We know this goes back really, really early. We've talked about it before. The Apostle Paul converted about 2 years after Jesus' death. Paul was persecuting the church specifically because people were treating Jesus like God. That means this goes back to the earliest church. The earliest church was treating Jesus like God. They're treating Jesus like God. They were worshiping him, they were praying to him, and so on. Paul saw this. Paul goes on a rampage. But what could have convinced a group of first century Jews that they should be worshiping this guy? You'd have to kind of be making the claims we read about in the Gospels, which means Jesus, as far as we can tell historically, was making these kinds of claims about himself, some very, very strange claims. So I'd think about that. If you like Jesus, you're going to have a problem viewing him as a lunatic or as a liar. And so you might want to take him seriously. And if you do, well, you got to start looking at his claims about being Lord. As far as a bunch of people telling, no, you're wrong, that would be stupid, that would be dumb. How much do these people know anyway? So talk to some knowledgeable people and see what you come up with.
That's a very, very nice response. I would say, I don't know if you're aware, but I was very recently in a similar situation because for most of my
Hang on. Are you a geologist?
yes,
Okay, then you can talk. Go ahead.
I
Sorry.
do speak with the authority of being a geologist. So,
Okay.
uh, so for much of the last years, I did feel the same way, or in a similar way. I had a lot of respect for Jesus and had a lot of respect for Christianity and all that. Um, but I couldn't find myself believing in something because I had a very skeptic, very hardcore atheistic stance. But I repeatedly and again found myself being very sympathetic and very wishing and willing to be Christian and to be, a believer in something. And it was quite recently that I actually changed my views. But I guess the change in my views came with or after the change in how I actually felt about all of this. Um, there is one recommendation that people made for the longest time now, and I actually had great arrogance when people gave me this advice, which was to read or listen to the book Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis. And with the little bit that I heard of it or read of it, I didn't want to, and I had some arrogance toward it. As I started reading and listening to it at the same time, I was actually very impressed with it. Very impressed with his responses and his explanations to certain things, matters of belief. But I think it wasn't so much the whole, logical aspect or the arguments for God and the arguments for Christianity than the belonging to Christianity that eventually gave me a push toward Christianity. You say it makes you feel better. You say your life has been much better. You are much happier. There's something that my wife actually said a while ago, which I very much appreciated, which was that when we grew up as children belonging to a certain religious belief, we weren't first taught about the basics or the truth of that religion and about why it is true and why it is not true and so on. We were simply raised with it, and we were doing we were doing things because we were taught that they were true. It is much more difficult to get into a certain religion approaching it rationally rather than just approaching it as a child. If you feel so good about it, if you feel very happy about it, there's nothing wrong with or nothing holding you back from becoming a child again and approaching it like that. Say a prayer, go to a church, go to a church service, say the prayer again and again, not just once, twice, I don't know, every day. Internalize a little bit of that love that you have and the happiness that you feel about it. Go into it like a child without waiting to be fully convinced that it is true. Just approach it with your feelings. There's nothing wrong with it. Absolutely nothing wrong with it. I wouldn't care a single bit about what people want to say nowadays of oh, it's not logical, it's not reasonable, you have to find reason and logic and science and evidence and proof and all that. No, you don't. You absolutely don't. Go with your feelings. You have feelings for a reason. They tell you something very useful and something very, very good. Go with them. If you feel so happy and so good about it, if you feel goodness in it, go to it. Approach it. Try to appreciate it. You don't have to dedicate your life to it right now. You can try it and see where it leads you. I mean, in theory, right? If you don't like it, you can still say, "Oh, actually, you know what? I don't really like this. I want to back out of here." You can still try it. Nobody's forcing you to go in or to stay in there. I would say if you feel so happy and so good about it, go and do it and um, attach yourself to it a little bit. I I did that, and I'm very, very happy. I'm so much happier than I have been for the last 10 years or so. Hope that helps.